When my sister, Emily, first announced her engagement, I was overjoyed. It was one of those moments you dream of sharing with family. Filled with laughter, love, and endless possibilities for the future. Emily had found someone wonderful, and I couldn't think of a better match for her. As the older sister, I had always taken pride in being supportive of her choices. But what happened next would put that loyalty to the test. The excitement of planning the wedding quickly turned into something more complicated. One evening, over dinner, Emily casually mentioned who she had chosen as her best man. My heart sank as she revealed that it was my ex-boyfriend, Jake. My stomach twisted in knots, and a rush of emotions flooded through me. I had broken up with Jake a little over a year ago after discovering he had cheated on me. And the fallout had been painful. I never thought I would have to face him again, let alone at such a pivotal moment in my sister's life. Emily, sensing my unease, quickly brushed it off. She insisted that Jake was still her best friend and that it shouldn't matter, now that we were no longer together. To her, choosing him for this role was about their friendship, their shared history, and not about my feelings. But to me, it felt like a betrayal. It was as if she was prioritizing her friendship with someone who had hurt me deeply over the bond we shared as sisters. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I understood that Emily had every right to choose whoever she wanted for her wedding party. But I also felt that she should have considered my feelings. I had been there for her through every breakup, every heartbreak, and now she was putting me in a situation that I found unbearable. I told her that I didn't feel comfortable attending if Jake was playing such a prominent role in the ceremony. To me, it felt like attending a wedding where the best man was the very person who had caused my heart to break. In the days that followed, I wrestled with my emotions. I felt a mixture of sadness and frustration. How could my sister, who knew the impact Jake had on my life, choose him to stand beside her on what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of her life? I felt torn between wanting to support her and protecting my own emotional well-being. As the wedding approached, our family became divided. Some members thought I was being dramatic, insisting that I needed to move on, and that I was letting my past interfere with Emily's happiness. They didn't seem to understand the depth of the betrayal I felt. Nor did they acknowledge the pain that came with seeing Jake again. Other family members, however, were sympathetic to my feelings. They recognized how deeply the situation affected me and voiced their support. I appreciated their understanding, but it didn't make the decision any easier. The wedding day arrived, and I could feel the tension in the air. Emily had worked tirelessly to plan every detail, and the venue was breathtaking. The flowers were perfectly arranged. The cake was exquisite, and the guests were buzzing with excitement. I watched from a distance as her friends rallied around her, helping her get ready for the ceremony. My heart ached as I imagined the joy of being there, sharing in her happiness. But the thought of facing Jake made it impossible. I struggled with the decision all morning. Part of me wanted to go, to put on a brave face and celebrate my sister's love. But the other part of me felt that attending would be a betrayal of myself and my feelings. I had spent so much time healing from the pain of the past. And the thought of seeing Jake, even for a moment, made my stomach turn. I couldn't imagine standing there, watching him smile and revel in the spotlight, while I was left to grapple with the hurt he had caused. Ultimately, I made the decision not to attend the wedding. As I sat in my living room, the weight of that choice settled heavily on my shoulders. I felt a mixture of relief and guilt. I was relieved that I had taken care of myself, but guilty for missing such an important moment in my sister's life. I knew that Emily would be upset, but I had to put my emotional health first. It was a difficult line to walk, and I felt the repercussions of that choice. The wedding happened without me, and I spent the day trying to distract myself. I went for a long walk in the park, immersed myself in a good book, and even called a friend to catch up. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling of loss. I thought about how much I loved my sister and how proud I was of her. And it pained me to know I wasn't there to witness her big day. The next few days were filled with mixed emotions. I received updates from family members who attended the wedding, each one reminding me of what I had missed. They painted pictures of laughter, dancing, and joy, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of exclusion. Emily had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. But the rift between us felt wider than ever. When I finally spoke to Emily after the wedding, I could sense her disappointment. She expressed her sadness about me not being there and how much it had meant to her to have me by her side. I explained my feelings, trying to articulate the conflict I had faced. I told her that while I loved her and wanted to support her, the situation with Jake had made it impossible for me to attend without feeling immense emotional pain. As we talked, it became clear that there was a disconnect between us. Emily struggled to understand my decision, while I felt increasingly justified in my choice. I loved her, but I also recognized that I needed to stand firm in protecting my own emotional space. The days turned into weeks, and our relationship began to shift. Emily's initial disappointment evolved into resentment. She felt I had prioritized my feelings over our bond as sisters. Family gatherings became awkward as tension simmered beneath the surface. I had hoped that with time, we could navigate the situation and find a way to reconnect. But it felt like we were growing further apart. I reflected on the situation, questioning whether I had made the right decision. A part of me wondered if I should have pushed through my discomfort for the sake of our relationship. But every time I thought about attending the wedding, the anxiety and hurt surged back. I believed I had acted in a way that was true to myself. But the impact on my relationship with Emily was undeniable. Eventually, I began to seek guidance from friends and therapists. They helped me process my feelings and encouraged me to communicate openly with Emily about my emotional boundaries. I wanted to mend our relationship, but I also needed her to understand that my decision wasn't made lightly. It was a decision rooted in self-protection and the desire for authenticity. Through therapy, I learned that it was possible to love someone while still asserting my boundaries. I realized that setting limits didn't mean I cared any less about Emily. It meant that I was taking care of myself. With that newfound clarity, I reached out to her again, hoping to bridge the gap that had formed between us. In the end, the journey of navigating my sister's wedding and the fallout from my decision was a complicated one. It challenged my understanding of love, loyalty, and boundaries. I hoped that with time and communication, we could find a way to heal and reconnect, even if it took a while to restore the bond we once had.
The past few months have been a whirlwind of emotions, and as I sit down to reflect on everything, it feels surreal to recount the chain of events that led me here. I'm 22, and not too long ago, I was navigating the aftermath of a devastating breakup with my ex-girlfriend, Ria, who was 21. Our relationship had been a significant part of my life for over 2 years. And when we met in college, I thought we were building a future together. We first crossed paths on campus, often exchanging glances and smiles as we went about our separate routines. I remember the moment I gathered the courage to slide into her DMs after 6 months of casual encounters. To my relief, she felt the same way, and we quickly became inseparable. The early days were filled with laughter, late-night study sessions, and shared dreams. I believed we were on the same page, particularly when it came to our plans for the future. We had agreed early on that we didn't want kids, which aligned perfectly with my own views. However, things began to shift about a year into our relationship. Ria, once the calm and level-headed partner, transformed into a party animal. She had a magnetic personality and a penchant for socializing that pulled her into circles I wasn't a part of. I found myself cleaning up after her nights out, watching her get progressively more intoxicated at parties, and seeing the toll it took on her grades. It was disheartening to witness, and despite my concerns, my attempts to intervene only seemed to push her further away. 3 months later, after a particularly wild party that caught the attention of the campus authorities, Ria finally agreed to scale back her partying. She told me she wanted to show some self-restraint for my sake. And while I was relieved, I still kept a watchful eye on her behavior. I hoped we could find our way back to the closeness we had once enjoyed. Fast forward to the next year, and while Ria had curtailed her wild parties, she began to invite more and more people into our shared space. The constant influx of guests turned our home into a chaotic hub of noise and destruction. I felt a creeping sense of anxiety every time I walked through the door. One day, I came home to find broken furniture and scattered belongings. It seemed like a party zone rather than a home. I grew increasingly frustrated and tried to voice my concerns. Ria shrugged them off, assuring me she would handle it. But she never did. The chaos reached a breaking point when I noticed her getting closer to one of her friends during a gathering. I watched as she flirted with him, sitting on his lap, laughing in a way that felt intimate. It was an invasion of my trust. And the betrayal hit me hard. Then came the night that changed everything. I was already on edge. And as I stepped into the living room, I froze. Ria was wrapped around this guy, sharing giggles and touches that were clearly inappropriate. I stood there in disbelief while her friends laughed and egged them on. The moment felt like a sickening betrayal. And in a flash, my world turned upside down. In a desperate attempt to escape the hurt, I stormed out of the house. That was when fate had its say. I stepped into the street, distracted by the chaos of my emotions, and got hit by a car. It wasn't a severe accident, but it knocked me unconscious. I woke up in the hospital, surrounded by my worried family and friends. They were concerned about my physical well-being, but I could feel the emotional wounds reopening. Ria didn't even bother to check on me. When she found out about the accident, she chose to ignore it and instead spent time with the guy she had been flirting with. While I lay in that hospital bed, my sister showed me a picture of Ria on social media, out on a date with him. It felt like a betrayal layered on top of betrayal, and I was filled with anger and sadness. During my recovery, Darlene, one of Ria's friends, stepped in. She was supportive and helped me through physical therapy. As we spent time together, I began to see Darlene in a new light. She was kind, responsible, and genuinely cared about my well-being. I started developing feelings for her, finding solace in her presence as I struggled to move past the heartbreak of my relationship with Ria. When I finally returned home, Ria tried to reach out, but I was done. I packed her belongings and left them on the driveway. The sight of her car pulling up to our house while I was cleaning out her things felt surreal. She screamed at me, hurling insults and accusations, but I remained unmoved. I had given her countless chances, and she had made her choice. As weeks went by, I began to rebuild my life. Darlene was there every step of the way, supporting me and helping me heal. It felt incredible to have someone who genuinely cared about my feelings and didn't treat me as disposable. The connection we built during my recovery grew stronger, and soon we were officially dating. Despite the warmth I found with Darlene, Ria was still a presence in my life, albeit an unwanted one. She attempted to defame me among our friends and family, painting me as the villain who had betrayed her. I was unfazed by her attempts to regain control over the narrative, especially since my mother stood by me, defending my choices. As time went on, Ria reached out more frequently, expressing her regret and longing for a reconciliation. Each time, I felt a mix of anger and pity. I remembered the pain she had caused and how her choices had led us to this point. My feelings had transformed into indifference. I no longer felt the love that once bound us. The culmination of Ria's attempts came to a head when she confronted me through social media, trying to provoke a response. I blocked her and chose to focus on my new relationship with Darlene. It was liberating to finally let go of the baggage and embrace the future I had ahead of me. Looking back, I knew that my journey had been a winding road filled with heartache and growth. I had faced the betrayal of someone I loved deeply, but through it all, I found strength in myself that I hadn't known existed. My relationship with Darlene was blossoming, built on mutual respect and understanding, while Ria was left in the rearview mirror, a reminder of a chapter I was glad to have closed. As I moved forward, I embraced the lessons learned from my experiences. I had discovered that I was capable of overcoming heartbreak and reclaiming my happiness. The road ahead felt brighter, and I was excited to see where it would lead.
Growing up, my family dynamic was complicated. My father, Jason, had a close relationship with his sister, Aunt Karen. I always knew their bond was deep, forged in the fires of childhood hardship. Their parents had abandoned them when they were young, and Karen had taken on the role of caretaker, sacrificing her own dreams to raise my dad. He often spoke of his gratitude, saying he owed her everything. I understood the importance of family, but as I grew older, the nature of their relationship began to bother me more and more. As the years went by, I noticed a pattern. My father was always there for Karen and her family. He supported them in ways that went beyond mere affection. He practically bankrolled their lives. If Karen had medical bills, he'd pay them. If my cousins needed rides or help with school, he was their go-to. There were times when he'd drive them out of town, ensuring they had everything they needed, all while my brother and I were left in the background. At first, I tried to brush it off. It felt childish to be jealous of my cousins. But as time passed, the imbalance became glaringly obvious. My brother and I attended private school, and while our education was important, so was our relationship with our dad. I remember countless weekends where he'd prioritize attending my cousins' events over ours. He would show up at my events, barely making it through the door before dashing off to their activities. Each time, I felt like a fleeting obligation rather than his child. The frustration simmered beneath the surface until it reached a breaking point during my high school graduation. The ceremony was a significant milestone for me, a culmination of years of hard work and dedication. I had been excited about it for weeks, envisioning my dad sitting in the audience, cheering me on. But when I received extra tickets for friends and family, I hesitated. Instead of checking in with me about who I wanted to invite, my dad took it upon himself to invite Karen and my cousins without asking for my input. The moment I realized they were coming instead of my friends, a wave of disappointment washed over me. I felt betrayed. It was as if my special day was being overshadowed by their presence. As the graduation approached, the resentment I had been holding onto boiled over. It wasn't just about that one moment, it was about the years of feeling overlooked and undervalued. During the ceremony, I wore a smile, but inside, I was seething. My heart sank when I saw my dad sitting with my cousins, laughing and chatting. I felt like a ghost at my own celebration. The speeches and accolades became a blur. And when it was time for me to walk across the stage, I felt a mix of pride and sadness. I was proud of my achievements but devastated that my dad wasn't fully present for me. After the ceremony, my frustration reached its peak. I was tired of feeling like an afterthought in my father's life. I found my dad outside, beaming with joy, surrounded by my cousins. The sight made my blood boil. Without thinking, I blurted out the words I had been holding back for far too long. Why don't you just marry and have kids with my aunt at this point? Since you're always thinking about them? As soon as the words left my mouth, I felt a mix of regret and exhilaration. It was a low blow, and I knew it. But at that moment, it felt like the only way to express the pain I had bottled up inside. My dad's face twisted in shock. Then anger. He exploded at me, his eyes wide with disbelief and hurt. I didn't want to fight, I just wanted him to see how deeply his actions affected me. I had expected him to at least acknowledge my feelings. But instead, I watched as the disappointment clouded his face. In the aftermath of that moment, the air felt thick with tension. My father turned away, leaving me standing there, emotions swirling. I saw him walk toward Karen and my cousins, the very people I had just expressed my frustrations about. It was like a slap in the face, a reminder of how far removed I felt from him. My mother, who had been watching from a distance, rushed over to me, concern etched on her face. I could hear her trying to soothe my rattled nerves, but all I could focus on was the pit in my stomach. That night, the family gathered at our house for a celebration dinner, and I felt like an outsider. While everyone laughed and shared stories, I was in my own world, replaying the events of the day in my mind. I felt a mixture of guilt for lashing out and a sense of vindication for finally voicing my pain. But the guilt weighed heavier than the relief. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the house was strained. My dad barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was clipped and curt. I felt the distance between us growing, and my heart ached for the father-daughter bond we had once shared. I didn't want to lose him, but I also couldn't shake the feeling of resentment that had taken root. I wanted him to understand how his favoritism towards my cousins made me feel small and unimportant. My relationship with my cousins was strained, too. They had always been a part of my life. But after the wedding incident, things felt awkward. I sensed a shift in their perception of me. I was no longer the older cousin they looked up to. I had become the source of tension and discomfort within the family. Their cheerful camaraderie felt like a reminder of the pain I was experiencing. And I withdrew further into myself. Eventually, I decided it was time to address the situation head-on. I reached out to my dad for a heart-to-heart talk, hoping we could find common ground and heal the rift that had formed. I wanted to explain my feelings, the hurt I had been carrying, and the longing to feel valued as his daughter. It was time to clear the air and see if we could rebuild our relationship. When we sat down together, I carefully laid out my feelings. I told him how his actions had affected me, how I felt sidelined in favor of my cousins, and how it broke my heart to see him prioritize their needs over mine. I expressed my love for him and my desire to repair our bond, emphasizing that I wanted him to be a part of my life but felt overshadowed by the family dynamics. As I spoke, I could see the realization wash over his face. He seemed to grasp the weight of what I was saying. There was a shift in his demeanor, a willingness to understand my perspective. He took a moment to process everything, and I could see the gears turning in his mind. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it felt necessary. For the first time in a while, I felt hopeful that we could bridge the gap that had developed between us. In the weeks that followed, things gradually improved. My dad made an effort to include me in family discussions and acknowledged my achievements more openly. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like we were making strides toward rebuilding our relationship. I learned the importance of communication, of speaking my truth, and how it could lead to healing. As for Rhea and her family, I continued to navigate the complexities of those relationships. I realized that while they had been a significant part of my life, it was okay to prioritize my own well-being and boundaries. I learned to distance myself from situations that felt unhealthy, and slowly but surely, I found peace in that decision. Ultimately, the experience taught me valuable lessons about family dynamics, the importance of setting boundaries, and the power of open communication. I emerged from the challenges with a stronger sense of self and a renewed appreciation for the relationships that truly mattered in my life. My bond with my dad grew stronger, and I realized that while family could be complicated, love and understanding could pave the way for healing and growth.